Detroit Homecoming has been made possible by the William Davidson Foundation, stimulating innovation, developing leadership, sustaining valuable programming, and tackling critical problems in 4 focus areas: Jewish life, economic vitality, cultural and civic vitality, and education. And by the Ford Foundation. We believe in the inherent dignity of all people and are guided by a vision of social justice, a world in which all individuals, communities, and peoples work toward the protection and full expression of their human rights.
So good morning once again. It's almost a dreadful cliche to say this, but philanthropy has played a major role in the revitalization of Detroit. And that's really one of the great understatements of modern times. But the truth be known, for decades, foundations have been a huge catalyst as they work relentlessly on the well-being and life in Detroit and its citizenry. Detroit is blessed by the presence and the involvement of some very, very significant foundations, both private and corporate. Foundations have led the way on many of the largest projects that are driving Detroit. For example, the Grand Bargain and the Riverfront Conservatory. But foundations have also been hugely responsible for scores of lesser programs, not enjoying the kind of notoriety or celebrity of those two. As a matter of fact, a major reason for the homecoming existence is the persistent support and involvement of a dozen foundations. And anybody who was on the education track the other day saw firsthand the power and the influence of a foundation with the Kresge project at Marygrove. So for the next few minutes, we'd like to explore the power of philanthropy through the lens of 4 major grant givers. All these people have unique stories to tell. They're very interesting, they're different, but they're going to talk about how they operate and how they impact life in Detroit. The fascinating thing is they're all doing the same thing, but they all do it differently, and in many ways they define what they do slightly differently. But it will make for a very interesting discussion. So let me introduce our panel. John Barker from Kresge, who is he's the managing director of the investment office. Melanca Clark, who is the president and CEO of Hudson-Webber. Terry Rhadigan at the end there, who's the executive director of corporate giving for General Motors, and Joel Wittenberg, who is vice president and chief investment officer for Kresge. I'm sorry, that's just a terrible mistake I made. For Kellogg. My apologies. I think it's fascinating to have 2 investment offers in our panel, but they have very interesting and very different stories to tell. So let's start with John Barker. John is, as I mentioned, the investment officer, but they have developed an entirely new approach and a mantra, so to speak, for how they guide their business. It's called 25 by 25, and it has a significant impact on how they operate. And I'd like to have John talk for a moment or two about 25 by 25.
Thanks, Jim. To understand 25 by 25, I'll step back and just a brief history on Kresge and our mission. So our mission is expanding opportunities for underserved populations living in American cities. And as everybody on this dais knows, to effectively serve underserved populations, it involves dismantling barriers that impede pathways to equality. And pardon me for the investment guy trying to speak in the philanthropic language. That's as best as I can do. Dismantling barriers that impede pathways to equality. Oftentimes these barriers are economic and racial. So as an institution, when we're trying to serve underserved populations, we began 3 years ago to think, what does that mean within each department, within each functional area of the foundation? That included communications, IT, and the team I work on, the investment team. And so we began to research, what barriers exist in the investment world. And what we found was disheartening. And I'll throw a few stats out. Bear with me for a second. There's $69 trillion managed in the institutional investment world. Of that $69 trillion, 98.9% is managed by white men. Of the hundreds of thousands of portfolio management jobs in the US, 75% are held by white men. And we know these stats, and we also know that diverse teams make better decisions than homogeneous teams. And the final stat I'll throw at you is that there is empirical data that suggests that firms led by women and people of color perform as well, if not better, from an investment standpoint than their white-owned peers. Let me repeat that. Investment performance, firms led by women and people of color perform as well, if not better, than firms led by white men. And yet I told you 99% of the dollars are managed by white men. So when we learned this, our team thought, what does this mean for us? What do we think about this? What can we do with this information? And we sat down and we said, we developed a three-pronged strategy, of which 25 by 25 is one component of that. The first is we want to make better decisions as a team. And at the time we thought about this, our team was consistent with the industry. We were 75% white men. So we said, to make better decisions, we need to build a more diverse and inclusive team. So we've started down that path. The second was, how do we improve the returns of our portfolio? And I just said, firms owned by women and people of color perform better than their white-owned peers. So we set this 25 by 25 goal, which is 25% of our US assets will be managed by women and or people of color by 2025. And then the third prong was, we want to tell our current partners who, again, the majority of our portfolio, at the time 88% of our portfolio was managed by white men, we want to tell them that diversity will improve their bottom line as well. So we've started on this, I don't want to call it a publicity campaign, but for an investment office that likes to run below the radar, to have to talk at events like this, I'm sure Joel can tell you as well. There are people who are willing to hear the message and respond, and I won't lie, there's certainly part of the population that says, our job is to make money for you, stay off my lawn. We refer to them as the stay off our lawn component. No matter what we do, they're not going to listen. Now that raises the question, is this someone we want to partner with if they're not willing to listen? And we've started down that path. But I'd say we've been heartened, at least in the early conversations, and this is new, we just rolled this out in April, with those who want to see our data and want to change.
Great. Well, it's a noble, worthy goal. Congratulations, John. Good luck with it. Terry, you folks have been operating General Motors has been operating in this city for about 100 years, give or take. And just recently, you've kind of restructured how you deal with the philanthropic aspect of your operation. Could you talk about the restructuring and then also talk about how you refocused some of your philanthropic objectives?
Thank you, Jim. I'd be happy to do that. Yeah, 108 years consecutively of headquartered in this great city. We love this city, and we're proud of our heritage and history here. I had the opportunity to work at the former GM Foundation in the 90s with my friend Vivian Picard, who's sitting here in the front row. Then I left and went off and did other things, and then came back right after basically the wind down of the foundation. It ceased to exist at the end of 2017. And at the beginning of 2018, it was the corporate giving model instead, so it wasn't a foundation. It allowed us to be more agile. It allowed us to be more strategic, and we refocused our areas of interest. We have focus areas that really focus on STEM education, on vehicle and road safety, and on community development. So we're really trying to align our philanthropic dollars with our business goals and business results. And of course, the vast majority of our funding and giving happens right here in the city. And we don't view the recipient organizations just as charities. We view them as partners and investments and friends. So we have an opportunity after a donation is given. There are metrics that the organization is expected to adhere to, social impact, if you will. And we get together at the end of the year, and we compare notes, and they're able to come in, and they like it. They come in and they say, here's what I did with the money. I told you I was going to do this, and this is what I did. And then we talk about the way forward after that. So it's less about just, coldly, blindly writing a check, and more about forging a partnership and a relationship. We all want the same thing. And the more we can partner with the other foundations and other philanthropists in the town, I think the more impact we can have. So working with Mayor Duggan and with Dr. Vitti and others to try and really get after the vexing problems that have been plaguing our city for a long time. So we're really excited about it, and we've seen in the 2 years or almost 2 years that we've had this new model in place that we have been able to really affect change and drive some different behaviors. So it's been very exciting. It's not just our money, but it's our huge employee volunteer base as well.
But General Motors has a long history of being actively involved with public education in the city, and a long distinguished relationship. But now a lot of that focus is on STEM, is that correct?
Well, that is correct. STEM education being a major focus, but we're also involved working, again, with the other foundations on third grade reading, which is not necessarily STEM, but if you don't get them reading at the third grade level, then STEM probably doesn't matter as much later on. So we're getting after it in places we didn't used to. And there's a lot of folks in this room that have been in meetings together to get after that really, really troubling problem of third grade literacy.
And it seems like STEM would be more closely aligned to your business objectives.
Clearly, we need engineers, we need software developers, we need technicians to work on our dealerships. There's a talent gap, and we believe that, again, in partnership with the city and with the school system, our Bright Pop investment, where we're training technicians of tomorrow so that folks can get jobs in dealerships working on these. Cars are, very computerized now, and so we need technicians that are able to come in there and fix those, and that's what we're doing. And so yes, it's a multifaceted approach.
Thanks, Terry. Melanca, so you're a relatively new CEO for a long, distinguished, venerable foundation, Hudson-Webber. And as CEO, you've changed some of the direction of that foundation. Could you talk a little bit about how you've made policy more important and how you've changed the direction, and also a little conversation about the safe and just work that you folks are focused on?
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Jim. So just to provide a little context, I'm the president of the Hudson-Webber Foundation, which, as you mentioned, has a very long history with this city. The foundation itself has operated over 3 decades. The family had predecessor foundations, so if you really add that up, it's a century. And of course, many folks are well familiar with the Hudson's department store, which was such an important part of this city. So I would say in probably the last 10 to 15 years, what folks have really known Hudson-Webber for is the investment, attention, and leadership that they put in around revitalization in this city. We are here in Woodward Corridor. That is something that you can see and feel when you go outside and see all the exciting things that are happening. It's a 30-year overnight success story. So Hudson-Webber has just had a major role in sort of all the things that we're so excited about today and that are so critical to the recovery of the city. So when I came to the foundation in 2016, and we talked about sort of where we were at that point, the bankruptcy is behind us. As I said, there is, although still fragile, there is the sort of the physical revitalization that you can literally see that's happening around the city. The public sector has, capacity and resource in ways that are very different and exciting. And so at the same time, however, we still have entrenched poverty in our city. We've got, 40% of our residents below the poverty line, 60% of our kids living in poverty, isolated and removed from access and opportunity. And so we just sat down and said, if we really want to see this recovery be sustainable and enduring, we have to ensure that it's inclusive. So what are we going to do? How are we going to think about our programmatic work to make that happen? And it's been an all hands on deck approach that part of it is thinking in process as we work with our program partners. Are we asking the right questions, and are we being intentional and picking up a little bit the way John has talked about the intentionality, and Terry as well? But if we are truly about being an inclusive, are we asking the right questions to hold people accountable for the objectives that we want to see? And when we're talking about that scale and scope of challenge that's here in the city, we have to get smart about it. It's not about the dollars. Really, if we're talking about structural barriers to opportunity and racial inequity, which is endemic to our country, but obviously lands large in a city that's predominantly minority, we have to be very smart about what levers we can pull. And so we've moved into that space because we have to.
Great. Joel, Kellogg is the largest foundation in this state by far. They've been operating since 1930. You're the chief investment officer of that foundation, which is a huge responsibility. So could you talk for a moment or two about how you manage your investments to affect social change?
Thanks, Jim, and appreciate that stress you just put on me about the responsibility I have here.
As if you didn't need it.
I had a full head of hair when I started this job, so. So at Kellogg, it's an interesting thing. We have learned the lessons of equity as our organization created a place that had equity for our employees. In 2007, we announced we were going to be an anti-racist organization. We looked at every single policy, every single process, everything we do. We talked to our employees, and we changed the way we do everything to make sure that equity is a part of how we do everything. At that point in 2007, we were 24% diverse. Today, we're over 44% and still growing. So, and that's just race and people of color. If you include gender, we're well higher than that. So we've been on a journey. It's a tough journey as well, and so we understand this. And so we're trying to take these lessons that we've learned and to say, how can we change this universe that John talked about? We see the same 98% of white men. You go into these meetings and it's all white men, and you know that there's an opportunity out there. So at Kellogg, we've done a couple of different things. First of all, we've worked within the existing investment system. If you go to our website, you'll see we've got a document called the Business Case for Racial Equity. And what that describes is that there is a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity that equity can create for us. In addition, we are very focused on a PRI portfolio. People in Detroit know the Entrepreneurs of Color Fund. It's a loan fund that we created in Detroit. JP Morgan was looking at their own loan fund for Detroit. They liked it so much they joined us and took it on as partners with us. And now they're rolling these loan funds out across the country, which is a great way. We think of that as compounding of our investment and Morgan's investment in Detroit. Our MRI portfolio is in making specific for-profit investments into areas that are consistent with our mission of equity, education, and food and health for children. And then last, we've got investments with these diverse-owned firms that we've talked about, that John talked about in a very similar way, of several $100 million in brand new firms that are starting out, people who have a great track record somewhere and start their own business, or people that have, firms that are existing and been out there for a while. The second area, which I'm even more excited about that we focus our work on, is an effort to change the financial industry from the inside out. So what do I mean by that? We're working with some of our largest investment managers. These are the firms that have had a struggle to become diverse. Many of these firms have tried hard and have not been successful at it. They want to figure this thing out. They know they have to figure this thing out, but they haven't had that success. So what we did was we convened our top firms into a focus group. This was people representing the senior leaders of these firms, representing over $3 trillion of assets. And we talked to them. We talked about our history. We talked about their histories. They told us about what they have tried, what they've succeeded at, what they've struggled with. And then we asked them, what can we do to help you? What can we do to advance this? And what we're doing now is we have engaged a top-notch, very large consulting firm, and we're developing a business plan or a way for these firms to tap into, specifically for their firms, of how they can do this. So there were things like best practices on hiring, best practices on education, how to promote people. You know, these firms are actually hiring a lot of diverse people. That's not the issue. It's that those people are not moving up at those firms. So there's modules in there on things like microaggressions, unconscious bias, hiring, things like that. So you're going to hear a lot more about this from us. We've got about, the process is we're in the process of signing these firms up for the work on this. They're being interviewed. We'll see where they are today, see how they progress as they go forward. And again, we have firms representing about $1.5 trillion that have signed up and are ready to go on this. So this is just the taste of it. We'll be announcing it later this year and really rolling it out and talking more about it. But again, this idea of, on one hand, bringing equity in from diverse-owned firms is a great way to start. But we also have to get the existing firms along with us, understanding this. And this is the game changer that we're working on.
So is it fair to say, Joel, that not only are you changing your culture, but you're trying to affect the culture of those organizations that you do business with?
That's exactly it.
Yep.
This process is tough. You know, I'm a white man who has benefited from privilege. And in learning about this, I see my role in making change in this world. And John and I have talked about this. We are a part of the change. You can be a part of the change or not, and we are dedicated to being a part of it.
So it's fascinating because John has said very much the same thing that you've said about the organizations you do business with. So affecting change is kind of a universal theme up here. I've long believed that the foundation world had an enormous opportunity to not just be of enormous benefit to communities and to people, but to affect change in this country. And I think we've seen some examples right here of that. So I congratulate you, Joel. I think also Detroit and Michigan owes the Philanthropic Foundation Committee an enormous debt of thanks for what you've done for decades and decades, for what you've done most recently in the revitalization of Detroit, but for what you're doing in the future. So as we wind down our time, I'd just like to ask everybody to please join me in thanking this group for the extraordinary work that they do, and that we owe them a great debt. Anybody like to add anything? Anybody? Any other thoughts? But again, thank you very much for what you do.